So I was just thinking a while ago that next month, Persepolis Rising, which is the next book in the Expanse series, is coming out, and I haven't reviewed any of the Expanse books, despite the fact that it's one of my favorite science fiction stories of the past couple of years. So I figured over the next month, I'm just going to review the first 6 books in the series, which I've all read. So let's start off with number 1, Leviathan Wakes. Yeah, I've got a copy of this one, but don't get used to that. I don't own most of them.
This is the introduction song. It's not very good, but it's not too long.
So this book actually has 2 main storylines at the beginning, which sort of tie into each other, and they don't really merge until around halfway through the book. If you've seen the television show, it's very similar to that. So, story number 1 is about this man named James Holden, who is an officer on board a ship. It's an ice trawler, and basically, it's actually a fairly mundane job for their world. What they do is they just go out to Saturn, they get ice, they bring it towards the inner solar system, and then they just use that for water. But while they're heading back from Saturn, one day they find a distress signal, and when they go out to investigate it, in a lifeboat, this stealth ship comes out of nowhere, blows up their ship, and leaves just Holden and a couple others alive and stranded. And they have no idea what happened, no idea why they decided to blow them up. All they know is that shit's bad. The other story is about this detective named Josephias Miller, who is being hired to track down this rich man's daughter, who is, she ran away from home, and she's getting involved with some groups that may or may not be considered terrorists, depending on your point of view. And her rich dad just wants Miller to capture her, basically, and bring her back. And as Miller is investigating her, he discovers that there's some sort of big conspiracy going on, which also ties into the ship that blew up Holden. So here's the main thing that I liked about this book, is that the world is great, and the 2 main characters are both very distinct and have their own very distinct voices and ideals. Now, Holden is a bit annoying at times, though less so than in the show. If you've seen the show, Holden can be grating at times, but in the book he's better. He's still very idealistic, still very what's the word? He still always tries to see the good in people, and he always tries to follow a rule of law, except for when rule of law it would be bad for people. So he is kind of a goody two-shoes, but you can actually understand why and where it's coming from, and it just makes sense in context. Miller, on the other hand, is the polar opposite. He is middle-aged, his life has gone to shit, and it wasn't that great to begin with. He's just constantly seen nothing but corruption and poverty and just terrible things his entire life. And so he has a much dimmer view of humanity than Holden does, and that leads him to do less savory and more brutal things than Holden might do. Which, if you've seen the show or read the book, it makes total sense why he would feel that way, and you can even empathize with him a lot. And obviously no spoilers, but sometimes the situations in here are more complicated than just this is good and this is bad. So out of the 2, I definitely like Miller more, but Holden is the main character throughout the entire series. So he's not bad at all. You live with him, you know? And like I said, the world is also great. This isn't quite on the level of The Way of Kings in how good it is, but it's still pretty great. Because in the world, it's basically humans have colonized the majority of the solar system, but we haven't invented anything that could be faster than light travel, or substitute faster than light travel. And so the outer reaches of the solar system and other stars and stuff are just totally off limits to us. And at the same time, you've got technology that seems fairly realistic. You know, we could actually, it's basically just taking modern technology and taking a few steps further. Like, they all have these things called terminals, which are basically just super advanced smartphones. Like, that makes sense, they'd have that. And most of the physics and stuff makes sense. You know, they don't have artificial gravity on their ships or space stations or anything. And you really get a sense that a lot of their technology is kind of being held together with spit and duct tape as well. So it can be kind of tense at times when you realize that you got a couple millimeters of metal separating you from a vast nothingness. And there's also different political factions and different ethnic groups which don't exactly exist today, but you know that makes sense with history. You know, not every ethnic group that is alive now has always existed. But there's a lot of history to this world. There's a lot of different groups with it makes sense why they would feel the way they do about certain things, or why they'd hate each other, and it's just a great way to get lost in, or a great thing to get lost in, I should say. That's just me being dumb. Don't worry. And while it does kind of take a backseat to the characters in the world, the story is still pretty good in this. You know, like I said, from the very beginning, there's a huge mystery about what's going on. And you can pick up bits and pieces of it from going between the two different stories, but the reader just really doesn't understand what's happening, and then shit just keeps getting worse and worse and worse until eventually you figure out what's going on. And even once that happens, it's not like things are all great afterwards. Like, this book ends on not exactly a happy note, but it's like, okay, we're not all dead, that's good. But then there's obviously sequels, so it's not like everything got fixed great. So, despite the title that doesn't make a lot of sense, and the fact that it's a giant long book, and the fact that it does have a few issues with it, like, the pacing could be a little better at times. You know, I'd say this book, my copy here is about 550 pages. You could probably have cut that down to around 450, because there are bits that feel fillery, but other than that, I don't have any major complaints about it. It's a very solid start to a great series, and I think if you're a fan of science fiction at all, you should really check this out. If you're a fan, especially if you're a fan of space operas.